2017 CF 15684, State v. Nelson, back from our lunch recess. Ms. Burdick, is the state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. I have had the stipulation that we talked about earlier during Detective Wagner's testimony marked for identification, and it has been signed by myself, the defendant, and Mr. Lahr. It is marked as GZ for identification. We would like to move it in at this time as agreed, and then have it read to the jury before the testimony.
Mr. Lahr? Mr. Nelson, are you ready to proceed?
Yep.
All right.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, so without objection, what's been marked for identification as states GZ is admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit, is that 159? Yes. Who will do direct for the next witness for the state?
I will.
And who will do a cross for the defense?
I will, Your Honor.
Right. Ms. Burdick, is the state ready to proceed?
Yes.
Mr. Lahr, defense?
Actually, may have an issue. I kind of want to address it now, should be resolved. Let me take the transcript from the.
I'm sorry? Yes. All right, Ms. Burdick, is the state ready to bring in the jury?
Yes.
Mr. Lahr, defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson, you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, let's bring in the jury, please.
Judge, while we have a second?
Pardon?
I said while we have a second, I had emailed the jury instructions and the verdict forms to defense counsel. So do you want me to also send them directly to you or wait until we get started with the charge conference at some point?
You can send them to me if they are the product of... Good afternoon, members of the jury.
Good afternoon, Judge.
Ms. Burdick, does the state acknowledge the jury?
Yes.
Mr. Lahr, defense?
Yes,
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
All right, members of the jury, outside of your presence, the court admitted into evidence State's Exhibit 159. I'm going to read it to you now. Stipulation, the Assistant State Attorney, Linda Drain Burdick, and the defendant, Scott Edward Nelson, as well as his lawyer, Robert S. Lahr, stipulate that defendant Scott Nelson authored a letter received by State Attorney Aramis Ayala on January 5, 2018, in which the defendant wrote the following, quote, "The keys to Jennifer Lynn Fulford's vehicle are directly across the street from the Publix supermarket, Publix. The Dollar General has a single small green shrub bush directly between the front door of Dollar General, Colonial Street. The keys are deep inside the bush. They may be still there. The bush by the front door between door and Link's bus stop sign," close quote. Ms. Burdick, please call the next witness for the state.
Christopher Conklin.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Sir, please state and spell your first and last name for Madam Court Reporter.
My name is Christopher Conklin, last name spelled Conklin.
Thank you. Ms. Burdick.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please explain for the court and the members of the jury how you were employed?
I'm employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement here in Orlando, Florida.
In what capacity?
I am a crime laboratory analyst in the biology/DNA section.
So what are the job responsibilities of an individual employed as a senior laboratory analyst in the biology DNA section?
I'm not a senior crime lab analyst. I'm just a regular crime lab analyst.
I'm sorry I promoted you.
Thank you. My duties involve screening items of evidence for such things as bodily fluids, hair, skin, and then taking them through a DNA process to obtain DNA profiles or results to then can compare to known standards also given in the case.
What sort of education or background, experience, training have you had that qualifies you to hold that position that you do with FDLE?
I obtained a Bachelor's of Science in Molecular and Microbiology from the University of Central Florida. Then once I was employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, I then went through an approximate 2-year-long training program to become a crime laboratory analyst. The training program has a 2-part system. The first part involves a lot of literature reading and technical manuals of the instrumentations that we're going to be using and the techniques. This involves also written tests, oral tests, practical tests, in order to make sure I've got the techniques and the knowledge down. The second part then has me paired with a already qualified crime laboratory analyst, where I then work side by side with them doing casework, so I know how to do the flow of actually working with casework. And then at the end of that, I then do a mock trial to actually make sure that I have the entire proceedings from techniques to presentation of the evidence to a jury.
All right. Have you had the opportunity to testify in court?
Yes, I have testified well over a dozen times as a DNA expert.
How long have you been employed with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in this capacity?
In this capacity, I have been a crime laboratory analyst since September of 2015, but I have been with FDLE since 2011 in a role that basically helped to maintain the lab and reagents, and also worked with a crime laboratory analyst if they needed help with screening of evidence.
What title would that individual have, or the position that you held for that time frame?
That position would be called a forensic technologist.
So explain, if you would, the process of how the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's crime lab receives items of evidence from local agencies for analysis.
So at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, we have what is known as a case acceptance policy. Basically, it is guidelines to what type of evidence we can accept in certain types of cases. So this could be as in a certain number of items to be submitted at one time. If anything that is outside that acceptance policy would need to be approved by a crime laboratory analyst supervisor of our section in order for it to be then tested.
All right. The crime laboratory is located where?
It is located here in Orlando, in downtown Orlando.
All right. And the lab has multiple disciplines that it handles, correct?
That is correct.
Ballistics, aside from just the DNA lab, correct?
That is correct.
Do each of the sections have these submission guidelines that you've described?
Yes, they do.
What is the purpose of the submission guidelines?
The purpose of these submission guidelines is to provide guidance to the agencies of what could be useful for them to be submitting to evidence, and also, depending on the severity of the crime, what we will not accept until we have gone through more probative evidence.
All right. Now, as it relates to the biology DNA section, what are the guidelines that law enforcement agencies have to follow initially in the submission of evidence?
Initially, they have to log into a system that then tells them what kind of evidence they are submitting in. This includes the description of the evidence, the type of packaging that it is in, and what services they are wanting for this evidence. Beyond that scope, I do not recall what else could be.
Let me ask you this. Is there a particular number of items that can be submitted initially or on the first submission without further permission of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I do believe that that certain number is 7 items of evidence, but again, depends on the actual type of case. I think in homicides and death investigations, they have an unlimited, but we still try to limit it to about 7 items.
How long typically does it take to work a case? or does that vary?
Working a case can vary depending on the nature of it. Some agencies request a rush to have it done, so some cases can be done within a week if we are very due diligent in the work. Some of it can, on average, usually takes about 30 to 60 days to actually get what we call logged off so that the report is sent to the agency for the results.
All right. Is there ever a point in time where the crime laboratory has a backlog, if you will, of evidence that is waiting for analysis?
Yes, there is a substantial amount of backlog. I do not.
I'll overrule the objection.
The back is continuously evolving. It can grow and shrink as time goes on. But right now, I don't know the exact number, but we do have a current backlog of evidence to be worked.
All right. However, you've explained in a death investigation or homicide case, depending on the results of an initial submission, law enforcement agencies can request a meeting with you as the assigned FDLE analyst working the case and your supervisors to accept more evidence items.
Yes, that is very much a possibility, or they can just directly speak with the supervisor themselves to actually get more items of evidence submitted.
All right. And if something is requested as a rush, is that something that you can approve, or does that have to go up your chain?
That is higher up the chain to actually accept that approval.
Your Honor, at this point, I would tender the witness for voir dire.
Mr. Lar? Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. As a result of your employment with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's DNA, biology DNA section, were you asked to look at evidence items in connection with the death investigation regarding one Jennifer Fulford?
Yes, I was.
What were you asked to do?
I was asked to screen various items of evidence in different submissions to then obtain DNA results and do comparisons to known standards that have been submitted in the case.
All right, you used the word screen. Is that the first step in the process once items of evidence are submitted?
Yes, that is.
What is involved in the screening?
So what is involved with screening is actually looking at the items of evidence and writing detailed notes of what I am seeing and then what I am then doing. Let's say it is an object that I need to take a swabbing of. I need to actually note where I'm taking the swabbing and then that I'm taking it forward into the DNA process. If it is just simply swabs that have been submitted, I take notation of the coloration of that and the condition that they are in before then taking cuttings and then bring it again through the DNA process.
All right, so evidence items can be tangible pieces of evidence, say a jacket or something like that, or they can be swabs taken from an item.
That is correct.
I'll overrule the objection.
Okay. But as far as the screening process goes, you're following the same procedure.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So explain, if you will, how the DNA testing process is accomplished.
So the DNA process is a 4-step process. So the first thing that we do is we take those cuttings from the items or the swabs that I've taken and put them into a sterile tube. From there, I'm adding chemicals and then heat to it to then break the cells open to put DNA out into the liquid solution. The next step is what we call quantitation. We need to find out approximately how much DNA is actually in that solution. Once we have that, we can then amplify it or basically Xerox copy certain pieces of the DNA millions and millions of times. An example of this would be instead of taking a big giant book and copying all of the chapters, we're only copying a certain number of chapters to get the DNA results or profile for comparison. Once the amplification is done, we go on to the next step, which is analysis. We put the amplified product through an instrument that then separates the DNA by size and then it then gives us a graph that shows where each of these sizes of the DNA is on a graph. This graph is our DNA results or profile.
Is it are these processes that you've described accepted as reliable in the scientific community?
Yes, they are.
How long has this process been in effect in your line of work?
In my line of work, it has been a tool since at least the late 80s, early 90s, but was used not just in forensics, but also like disaster relief for like missing persons or lost people.
Non-responsive.
I'll overrule the objection.
You can finish your response.
And those fields, and then as the technology advanced, it then became more and more probative as a individual characteristic for forensic needs.
Now, you talked about having items submitted where you have swabs or you can take cuttings from an item. Is there a difference between those two types of evidence?
No, there is not.
When something is swabbed, a jacket or say this lectern, is that the type of evidence that can go through that amplification process?
Yes, it can.
All right. Have you heard the term touch DNA?
Yes, I have.
What is that?
So touch DNA is just simply light or touch object to be able to transfer your DNA from yourself to that object. So me touching this surface, I am leaving some of my DNA. We could swab this and possibly obtain my DNA profile from this area.
How is that different, if it is, from the testing of bodily fluids, such as blood, semen, or saliva?
So with the testing of bodily fluids have the DNA, the majority or all of the DNA there, as compared to touch DNA, where some of it depends on how long, even the length, let's say, I've touched. Where like blood, semen, and saliva, the actual DNA there is resting on that surface and or swab and can actually be tested to obtain for the majority. So we use a piece of software that is a giant advanced calculator that helps to resolve or deconvolute, if we want to use a more advanced term, the mixture out into the different contributors. But the first thing that I have to do before ever putting it into the software is I have to determine how many contributors are in this mixture. Because I need to be able to say, okay, this is a two-person mixture, and then put it into the software. Before the software, we would have to do it all by hand to try to say, is this a major profile? Is this a minor profile? Can I do any sort of comparisons with it? So the technology has advanced to actually be able to resolve mixtures a lot easier.
Are there certain companies or you mentioned software that are generally accepted in the scientific community as being reliable for the purpose you stated?
Yes.
Right. So what software is used by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
So this software is called StarMix, or STRMIX. It is produced by ESR out of New Zealand. It is currently used in 43 labs across the world and United States.
And what is it that you're actually testing with the STR mix or the STR mix?
So what I'm doing with StarMix is, again, I'm telling it the number of contributors. It then runs a software kind of like a hot and cold game. Best analogy for this is, let's say we have 8 people that start randomly throughout this building. They are blindfolded so they don't know where they have to go, but they have somebody that has talking into their ear that's telling them either hot or cold as they're trying to get to what would be the best available answer. An example would be like them trying to get to the jury box. we run a process, it runs the first part that tries to get them onto this floor. And then in the second part of the process, it then wants them to get all 8 into the jury box and then explore all of the jury box to get the best answers for the actual mixture. From there, I can then enter in known standards to then have it give me a statistical answer that's called a likelihood ratio that tells me how likely a person is to contribute to that mixture.
Now, are you looking for certain genetic markers?
Yes.
Right, explain how that process works.
So the process that we use is called STR, or short tandem repeats. So everybody has DNA that is similar, but also there is a lot of DNA that it differs. The only people that have the exact same DNA profile are identical twins. So what happens is through the DNA process and those graphs that we produce, you get 1/2 from your mother, of course, and 1/2 from your father, making you a unique individual. So when a mixture, we see multiple peaks instead of what would be at most 2 peaks at any one location. The testing we use, we look at 24 different locations on the DNA. 3 of them are gender, 2 are specific to male, and the other 21 is parts of the DNA that anybody could actually possibly have.
Were you given, in the context of this case, we've been referring to as known standards? Standards that were attributed to a particular individual?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the members of the jury whose known standards you received?
I will have to need to review my reports to see who I have standards from.
That will help refresh my recollection.
Yes, it would.
May the witness do that, Your Honor?
Mr. Law, go ahead.
The buccal swabs are standard.
Suggestion, non-responsive.
I did not hear what Mr. Block said.
He was saying, no, he made a non-responsive, which I sustained.
The question was, whose known standards were submitted?
The known standards that were submitted were Reed Berman, Jennifer Fulford, Robert Fulford, and Scott Nelson.
Your Honor, with 2 items. The first already introduced into evidence as Exhibit 57. And then the other introduced as 146 in evidence.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, 57 was already opened by the previous witness. So let me have you take a look at that and tell me if it's something that you recognize as having had contact with in the past.
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
I recognize it to be the DNA card or standard from Jennifer Fulford. I recognize it from the FDLE case number, my handwritten initials, the agency exhibit number, and the date that I actually screened the evidence.
Were you able to utilize the process that you described and did you have any success in determining Mrs. Fulford's DNA profile?
Yes, I was able to obtain a full DNA profile of Jennifer Fulford.
I have now cut open 146 in evidence. If you could look at that packaging and the items contained therein, and tell me if those are items you've had contact with in the past.
Yes, they are.
And what do you recognize those to be?
I recognize these to be the buccal swabs from Mr. Scott Nelson. Again, I recognize it from the FDLE case number, the agency exhibit number, my initials, and the date that I examined them.
Were you able to get any results from the buccal swabs of Scott Nelson that are in states 146 in evidence?
Yes, I obtained a full DNA profile from Scott Nelson.
Now, does the Florida Department of Law Enforcement have guidelines that would prevent contamination, if you will, in the lab? Are there protocols and procedures that you must follow so that there's no either contamination or cross-contamination of items?
Yes, it is part of our accreditation process and our standard operating procedures. We wear things such as personal protective equipment like gloves, masks to cover our face and nose, mouth and nose, lab coats to actually prevent for transfer of myself to the evidence. We do things such as also keeping out only one item of evidence at a time in an area. We also do our unknown samples and known samples at different times and dates as well for the extraction process and even screening if possible, depending on how it's been submitted to us. We do things like also cleaning the surfaces that we're doing on and then putting something between that surface and the actual evidence. And also cleaning the areas we're doing all the DNA processes as well. We do our best to prevent any sort of contamination.
And I may have missed this in your response, but did you say that you place known standards or you put something in each sample so that if there is a positive, you know whether or not some contamination has occurred?
Yes, in our extraction process, we have what's called a negative control. So in this negative control, we are running the chemicals just through the DNA process to see if there's any possible contamination from the chemicals themselves or anything else through the DNA process. There's also positive and negative controls in the amplification to make sure that the amplification part actually worked as well.
All right, so if you would see a result in a negative control, then you would go back and look to see where a problem may have occurred.
That is correct.
Were you able to obtain full DNA profiles from the samples attributed to Mr. Berman and Mr. Fulford as well?
Yes, I was.
What was the date of your first involvement?
The date of my first involvement is would be September 29th, 2017, and and anything from that point forward, I do believe.
When you begin to work an item of evidence, what procedure do you use?
So the screening of the item of evidence is I'm using those techniques I said before to prevent contamination. I examine each item of evidence first at my work area after obtaining it from our evidence intake section. They take all the evidence in from the agency, keep it under a lock system that very few people have access to. I make a request for the actual items of evidence, and then is then taken into my possession, where I then put it under also lock and key, as well as for that I and only a couple other people have access to before I start screening the actual items of evidence.
Do you take photographs yourself of each item, either before, during, or after the examination?
Yes, I like to take pictures of the actual evidence if it is a large item like, let's say a jacket or a shirt or any other type of larger items that isn't just a swab.
Your Honor, if I may approach the witness with what's been marked as State's Exhibit FP. Let me start with that.
Go ahead.
Have you take a look at this document and tell me if you recognize what's shown there.
Yes, I recognize it as an item of evidence that I had screened that is also inside my case file.
All right? How would you describe that item of evidence?
I described this item of evidence as a Blue Moon alcoholic bottle.
Your Honor, this one I would say to introduce FP for identification and evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, it's been marked for identification as FP is admitted evidence as State's Exhibit 1-6.
If I may approach the witness with what's already been introduced into evidence as State's 132.
Go ahead.
And I have opened the exterior packaging, but if you could look at that and what is inside and tell me if you've had contact with that in the past.
Yes, I have.
And can you look inside and tell us what it is?
It is the same blue bottle as I seen in the photograph shown to me earlier.
All right. Now, did you take swabs of that, or how did you process that item?
So with this item of evidence, I swabbed the mouthpiece area outside and in order to try to obtain who could have drank from this.
And what did you do with that swab once you took it?
So after I took it, I have to let it dry because we don't want to put a moist cotton tip swab through the DNA process unless we're immediately running it through. So I let it air dry in my secure evidence locker that then I took a cutting from, took the entire cotton tip swab through the DNA process.
And were you successful in obtaining any results from that swab?
I'd have to refer to my report to refresh my memory.
With the court's permission?
No objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
So I obtained a full, complete DNA profile from it that is consistent with a male individual. At the time of me screening it, the only buccal swab or standard that I had was Mr. Berman, and he was excluded as a source from the bottle.
Right. Did you ultimately compare it to the other known standards that we talked about, Mrs. Fulford, Mr. Fulford, and Scott Nelson?
I did compare it to Mr. Scott Nelson, and it was a match that the result was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the source of the DNA from the bottle came from Mr. Nelson than from a completely unrelated individual.
All right, well, now you're gonna have to translate for us what that means.
So what that means is that, given the evidence, the person who possibly could donate this DNA is greater than 700 billion times or more than 100 times the Earth's population, more likely to be Mr. Nelson than from anybody else in this room, or anything that could be completely unrelated to him.
All right, so you earlier said that the test system that you use determines genetic material at 24 markers.
That is correct.
Right, and you said that you had gotten a full profile, all 24 markers from the known standard of Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
All right, were you able to get that same full profile from the swab taken from the beer bottle?
Yes.
I may approach the witness with what's as FQ and FR for identification.
Go ahead.
I will add 129 in evidence to that.
Okay.
Showing you first the two documents that I referenced. Can you take a look at those and tell me if you recognize them?
Yes, I recognize them.
And what are they?
These are pictures of a towel that was submitted into evidence. I recognize it again by the FDS number that I have written in the picture, my initials, the date that I had screened it, and the actual agency exhibit number as well.
All right, there's a second document there that's marked as FQ. Is this a two-sided object?
Yes, this is a two-sided object, so each picture here represents one side of the towel. So I have one side labeled as side A and the other side labeled as side B.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FQ and FR identification into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, what's been marked for identification as FQ is admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 161. Without objection, what's been marked for identification as FR is admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 162.
Permission to publish.
Granted.
Is it my understanding, or is my understanding correct, that you retain these images in your file,
Yes, that is correct.
but do not keep a digital image?
Yes, that's also correct.
So showing you first 161 in evidence. Now, what color was this towel?
This towel was a white in color towel.
All right, so I recognize that there's a lot of white in the picture, but there are also what appear to be circles, pluses, and other markings on this. Were those on there when you received the towel?
No, they were not. They were added by me while screening the item for actual bodily fluids. So each of those circled areas are areas of interest that I did testing on for what we call a presumptive test.
Is the same true for 162 in evidence?
Yes, it is.
All right, and if you look at the bag that I placed in front of you, which is, for the record, 129 in evidence, is the item that we were looking at in the exhibits inside that bag?
Yes, it is.
And is it in the same condition that it was photographed in? Meaning it has the markings that you had placed on there and then photographed?
It does. In the screening process, on this, there was what we call reddish brown staining. Reddish brown staining is indicative of, at least in color, for the possibility of blood. So what I use is a color change test, where I take a rubbing of the actual stain, add a series of chemicals in a certain order, and see if there's a color change. If there is a color change, it is positive for the chemical indications of blood.
So if there's a plus sign next to one of your circled areas, that was positive for blood?
Yes, any plus sign means that it was positive, any equal sign means that it was negative.
So once areas on that object are determined to be positive for blood, what do you do with it?
So after I've determined it was positive for blood, I then look at the actual exhibit and determine which ones could be best representative of the certain areas of the towel. So I then take a portion of the ones that I've selected, the ones that I then labeled with letters, to then take forward into the DNA process.
Do you recall, or do your records reflect whether or not you tested 9 separate portions of that towel for DNA?
I'd have to refer to my report and notes to verify, refresh my memory.
May the witness do that.
Mr. Lar? Mr. Lar?
No objection.
Any objection to him refreshing his recollection? All right, go ahead, sir.
Yes, it was 9 stains I had tested.
And these were all blood stains?
Yes, these were all stains that were positive for, that gave the chemical indications of blood.
Were you able to get results from each of those 9 stained areas?
I need to be able to have my report out to recollect my memory for all of them, especially with the vast amount of them.
Your Honor, may the witness use the report to assist him in his testimony?
No objection.
All right, go ahead.
If you could refer to the date of the report.
The date of this report is May 9th, 2018. May I keep it out for this, these full 9 stains?
May the witness use it to refer to during his testimony?
Mr. Lar? Can he use it for all 9 areas?
I had agreed to that report.
Okay, I didn't, but I thought we were taking them one by one, but go ahead, sir.
Thank you.
I think the question, if I'm remembering, is did you get results from all 9 stained areas?
Yes, I got results at all 9 areas listed.
Right. And did you compare those results to any of the known standards that you had in this case?
Yes, I compared all the stains that I got results from to all the standards that I had in the case up to this point.
Ultimately, are they the 4 that we talked about that you had at the time of the report? You said it was in May of 2018?
Yes, it was all 4 standards by this time I had for testing and comparisons.
And did you find the day of any of the individuals who you had known standards for on this towel?
Yes, I found many of the stains were what we call complete single source. Complete single source. And there were some that were also mixtures. So depending on the stain, I was able to compare both Mr. Nelson and also Miss Fulford to them. Some, we'd have to go into specifics to each individual stain for their contributions.
Right. Let me see if I can make this a little easier. Were there three single source stains belonging, where the DNA belonged to Jennifer Fulford?
There were 4 stains that were matched Miss Fulford.
All right. And how many matched Mr. Nelson?
There was 3 stains that were single source that matched Mr. Nelson. There was 2 stains that was a mixture that had both Mr. Nelson and Miss Fulford as contributors to those mixtures.
If I may approach the witness with FS, FT, FU, and FV for identification.
Go ahead.
Are these photographs taken by you of another item of evidence?
Yes, these are.
How would you describe that item?
This item would be a white T-shirt that, again, has all my markings for what I had done during screening.
Is it a solid white T-shirt without any markings?
I'd have to refer to my notes recollection or actually see the item to recall it even more.
All right, let me show you 130 in evidence. I have cut that open as well for you. You can look at that.
It is a generally in white in color or white-ish color T-shirt with a little bit of gray around the collar.
All right, so again, we're looking at a white item on a white background.
Correct.
Looking at these photographs. This point, we can introduce the reference letter and exhibits for identification into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, what's been marked for identification as stated by Ms. Burdick are admitted into evidence, starting with State's Exhibit 163 and then consecutively numbered as determined by Madam Clerk.
FS is 163, FT is 164, FU is 165, and FV is 166.
Commissioner Pelishar.
Granted.
So did you put that shirt that we looked at through the screening process that you described earlier when talking about the towel?
Yes, I did.
All right, and the screening process did the screening process involve the outside front, the inside front, and inside back of the item?
Yes, I looked at all surfaces of the shirt individually to determine if there was any stains to then test for bodily fluids.
So showing you 163 in evidence. The plus signs next to circles indicate what again?
They indicate that they were positive. Positive for the chemical indications of blood.
And then on this one, which is designated at the bottom as outside front, you have letters associated with particular stains.
Yes, the stains that have letters to them are ones that I then took forward into the DNA process.
bill, J at the top, I over towards the shoulder.
Yes.
164 is identified at as the outside back. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is.
All right, and then there is a circle with a K next to it.
Yes, that one, again, because it has the positive sign there, it gave the chemical indications of blood. And seeing as this was one of the only stain that I had seen on this side, I then took it forward for DNA.
Did you then turn the shirt inside out
Yes, I did.
and continue the same process?
Yes, I continued the same process on the inside, as I wasn't sure if there were, if the pattern of the blood or if there was different staining on either side. So that's why I went ahead and tested both sides, inside and out, for chemical indications of blood or anything that I could do for finding the wearer of this item as well.
All right, what do you mean by that?
So.
Say finding the wearer.
So wearer is where I take a swabbing around most common areas that could come in contact with the person. If you're wearing a shirt, the most common areas would be around the collar, the inside of it, the armpits, in order to actually be able to find out who could possibly be wearing this item of evidence.
And the final exhibit that I have here in my hand is 166, the inside back with several areas circled and then one letter.
Yes, I recognize that. Again, the positive symbols are ones that were positive for the chemical indications of blood, and the one with the letter is the one I took forward to DNA.
Were you successful in obtaining a DNA profile of each of those stains that you described? And if my notes are correct, A through L?
Let me refresh my memory with my report, and I can verify that. Yes, stains A through L are what I sent through the DNA process, and all of them I obtained DNA results from.
Now, stains A, B, C, I, and K, did those come from a single source?
The stains A, B, C, F, I, and K all had the same complete DNA profile. Could be possible discoloration that could be from a bodily fluid. In this case, it was, again, reddish brown, so I had the indication that it could possibly be blood. I then tested all of the individual stains on here. I do believe there are 4 circles, 4 areas that I had tested. Each one has its own positive sign. And then I labeled 2 of the stains from 2 different areas to actually take them forward into the DNA process.
All right. And would that be stain A and stain B?
That's correct.
168 in evidence has a label at the bottom, backside. Explain, if you would, for the members of the jury we're looking at.
So what we are looking at is the backside of the watch, the one that would be most contact to the person's skin. Again, I noticed reddish brown staining on the actual watch, circled certain areas where I had seen this reddish brown staining, including even some reddish brown staining that I had seen kind of on the backside of the watch face. Each one of these I tested individually for the chemical indications of blood. The ones that are positive have a plus sign on them. The ones that I then took forward onto DNA have a letter designation.
The item that I placed in front of you states 131 in evidence. Is this the watch that you tested? I've opened the exterior package. Is there a sealed package inside?
Yes, there is a sealed package inside.
Would you open that for us, please?
Yes, I recognize this item of evidence.
You said that the lettered stains A through D were submitted for the DNA process.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
Right, were you able to obtain results from either of those stains?
Let me refresh my memory from my report.
May the witness proceed, Your Honor.
Mr. Lar,
Your Honor, if he needs to refresh his memory at any point, that's acceptable,
at any point? Okay. All right, sir, go ahead.
as long as he informs us after we do.
Okay.
Okay. What was the question again?
Did you submit those stains labeled A through D and get any results?
Yes, I submitted them through the DNA process. I also submitted one other swab that I took myself for possible wear that I did at the backside of the watch, trying to miss any red-brown staining to try to get a true representation of the wearer. So for stains A and B, I obtained the same complete DNA profile that is consistent with a female individual. And there was other limited data at this location, but this data, I could not do any interpretation with it because it was so low.
What does that mean?
So what that means is in the DNA process, we can sometimes have a full single source profile, but there could be like one or two peaks that could indicate a second person, but we can't do any sort of comparisons to just one or two locations. We need more locations in order to actually do any sort of comparisons. It could be from Mr. Nelson or somebody else, but I have no idea. So that's why we say it is other limited data that we can't interpret that suggests the possibility of an additional contributor. But for the single source complete profile, it matched Jennifer Fulford, again, at greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it was her rather than from an unrelated individual.
All right, and would that result be, I think you indicated at stain A and stain B?
That is correct.
And just so we have fewer stains on this item, showing 167 in evidence. Stain A up here, the top of the picture, and then stain B closer to the class.
That's correct.
Were you able to get results for stain C and stain D and what you referred to as wearer DNA?
Yes, the results from stain C demonstrated the presence of a mixture that was consistent with two donors, including at least one male individual. Mr. Nelson is included as a possible contributor from the DNA profile, from the mixed DNA profile, and it is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it came from him and one unrelated individual than from two completely unrelated individuals. Unfortunately, Ms. Fulford, Mr. Berman, and Mr. Fulford, so the two Fulfords and Mr. Berman, were excluded as possible contributors to stain C.
Right, and stain B, any results on that?
Sane D had a complete DNA profile that was consistent with a male individual. There was other limited data, just like in stains A and B, that I could not interpret, that suggested there was a possible second contributor. The complete DNA profile matched Mr. Nelson at greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it was him instead of an unrelated individual.
So would it be fair to say, when you're talking about limited data, that it's likely or possible that somebody else wore this watch at some point in time in the past and left some DNA behind?
Yes, that could be a possibility. It could be that or is another source, and I just can't see as much DNA to do any sort of comparisons.
That number that you keep, 770,
700 billion times, more likely.
700 billion, is that the highest statistic reported out by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes, that is what we report out, but the number is could be higher than that. It's just any number larger than that is hard for some people to wrap around, so we have concluded to use only 100 times more than the Earth's population. If you wish me to actually tell you the correct numbers, I'd have to go into my file to tell you.
That's fine. Identification along with 58 in evidence.
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry.
Take a look at that photograph. Is that an item of evidence that was submitted to you for DNA testing?
Yes, it is.
How would you describe it?
I would describe it as a zip tie that has been cut open for where it had been zip tied together, along with a long strand from the other end of it.
All right. Is 58 in evidence the item that you photographed in FY for identification?
Yes, it is.
At this point, I would seek to introduce FY for identification into evidence.
That objection was been marked for identification as FY is admitted into evidence as States Exhibit 169.
Were you asked to perform DNA testing on that item?
Yes, I was.
Commissioner Publisher,
Granted.
showing you 169 in evidence, what are you indicating with this photograph?
So what I'm indicating with this photograph is the actual item of evidence, and then from the notes, I stated that I had swabbed the loose end, so I made sure to circle the actual end that I had swabbed for possible to take on for DNA.
Were you able to get any results from that item?
I'm referring to the same report that I've been referring to for my memory. Excuse me, it's actually a different report. It is the report dated June 7th, 2018.
And is that yes or no as to whether or not you were able to get results from the swabbing that you did of that item?
So for this item, I took it onto the DNA process.
Objection, non-responsive.
Sustain the objection.
That's a yes or a no. Were you able to get results?
No, I was not.
All right. Do you have an opinion as to why you were not able to get results?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
Overruled.
What's the reason?
Yes, in your opinion.
In my opinion, during our DNA process, at the quantitation step, we can see approximately how much DNA is in it. At that step, it showed that I would not get a DNA profile suitable for any sort of comparison, so it was just dropped and not continued on through the DNA process.
Does that mean that there wasn't enough DNA on the item for you to continue with the testing?
That is correct.
Did you also receive swabs from another zip tie? This one actually submitted by the Orange County Sheriff's Office.
Yes, I did.
And were you able to put those swabs through the testing process?
I did put them through the testing process. I have to refer to the report to get to what the actual results were.
Right.
The lab report is October 26, 2017. The results that I got was it was a partial DNA profile consistent with a female individual. I then compared it back to Mrs. Fulford, Jennifer Fulford, and it matched her. The observed DNA profile from the swabs of another zip tie was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it was from her than from an unrelated individual.
Even though you've described the results as partial, the statistics are still at the highest threshold that FDLE reports.
That is correct.
Now, were you provided with duct tape in this case?
Yes, I was.
Evidence items reported as duct tape.
Yes, I was.
All right. If I may approach the witness with FZ, GA, GB, GC, GD, GE, and GF for identification.
Go ahead.
You could take a look at those photographs and tell me if those are photographs taken by you of duct tape submitted for potential DNA testing in this case.
Yes, these are the duct tape that I examined for possible DNA.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce the reference letter exhibits for identification into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, what's been marked for identification as stated by Ms. Burdick will be admitted into evidence, starting with State's Exhibit 170 and being consecutively numbered as determined by Madam Clerk.
FC would be 170, GA 171, GB 172, GC 173, GD 174, GE 175, and GF 176.
Permission to publish these items, Your Honor.
Granted.
All right, showing you 170 in evidence. Can you explain what we're looking at?
What we are looking at is the set of evidence from the agency agency number 70, which is referred to as the duct tape removed from Jennifer Fulford's ankles. This shows the couple of the actual bundle of duct tape itself with substance on it. I did observe a couple of what could be possibly cut ends on this actual like wrapping of duct tape. And those indicated areas are a couple of the areas I took forward to the DNA process.
And when you're referring to cut ends, you're talking about the red circled areas?
That is correct.
All right, was this a multi-layered piece of duct tape?
Yes, it did appear to be a multi-layered set of duct tape.
Showing you 171 in evidence. This also has agency number 70. So is this a different portion of the duct tape from the ankles?
So the difference between the two pictures is the first picture, I just let the duct tape sit out by itself, but I couldn't get all of what I could show for the actual evidence. So I had assistants with me to then pull out and show more of the inside of the duct tape to then take an additional picture of it.
And then 172 in evidence, also identified as agency number 70. What are we looking at here?
So we're looking at the same duct tape, but now we're looking at the opposite side. So from what would be the inside sticky side, we're now looking at the outside kind of glossy side of the actual duct tape.
Showing you 173 in evidence. This has a different agency number, 71, associated with it. Can you explain what we're looking at?
So what we are looking at here is submitted by the agency and noted as duct tape removed around Jennifer Fulford's face as agency number 71. This is again just a general picture of it, just laid out, letting it sit by itself out there.
And there's writing on here that says top plus bottom together with initials CC dated 2/12/18. What does that mean?
So this piece of duct tape appeared to be two different parts, like a top and a bottom side. And so to make it a little bit more clear in my notes, during my tech review process that is done with all of the work that I've done, another analyst has to review it. They suggested for clarity to actually add that in there to show that in this picture, it is both the top and the bottom together.
Showing you 174 in evidence. Is this a different view of the same evidence item?
Yes, so the first one was the sticky side of the actual duct tape, and this is the outside glossy side. Again, with the top and bottom pieces together.
175 in evidence.
Okay, in this picture here, we're looking at the actual duct tape between, actually separated out. The duct tape didn't want to keep itself together in one cohesive unit, so that's why I then started to designate a top and a bottom. From here, you see the areas that I had labeled as possible cut ends that I then took forward into DNA.
And 176 in evidence.
So what we are looking at is on the bottom piece of the duct tape, around the center towards the right side, it appeared to be a possible cut end, like a tear in the actual duct tape. So I took that individual picture of it to then say where I'm swabbing for that actual individual piece.
Did you take all of the areas that you had indicated through the DNA testing process?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to get any results from the duct tape either on the ankles or on the face?
Referring to my report dated June 7th, for the duct tape around the ankles. I obtained no DNA results from the, what I called the inner right layers. There was a cut end that looked to be on the one of the inner layers, and the same on the left side. And then there were also, from the cut ends on that exhibit, I got limited DNA results that I could not interpret. For the duct tape around Miss Fulford's face, the inner bottom cut ends, again, it looked like we peeled back a little bit of it to actually see if there was cut ends. On the inner bottom piece and the bottom right center cut, the last picture that you had shown, there was not enough DNA to continue on, so it was dropped at quantitation. The top cut ends, it was limited DNA results that I could not do any interpretations with.
All right. So, are there things that affect your ability to get results, such as if something is weathered or in contact with decomposition fluids?
Yes, such things as being exposed to the elements like sun, rain, moisture, those can affect DNA and actually degrade it. So that could explain why I got the results I did. Decomposition could also be an indication of why I was getting it as well for these certain results.
Now, were you ultimately provided with an evidence item that would be described as a knife?
Yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, we're going to take a brief recess. During the recess, you're under all the court's instructions, including the instruction not to discuss this case amongst yourselves with anyone else. You're going to continue to leave your notepads and your pens here. Please follow the deputy in the jury room. We'll bring you back as quickly as we can. Thank you. All right.